Well, hey, welcome to the curriculum for Renewal Part 1. We have been doing this series through teaching through the Lord's Prayer. And so this first curriculum, we're going to be talking through the first two parts of the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6, which is Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I was thinking a lot about just even the way Jesus starts that prayer. I think it's really strategic. It's very interesting the way he starts the prayer. As I was thinking about this, I thought about my girls. I have twin girls, and we own a cat. Her name is Puzzles, and we've had the cat longer than the kids. And it was an adjustment for Puzzles when the twins were born because she was used to a lot of quiet. She was, used to just being able to relax and be wherever she wanted to be. And then suddenly these two very loud little humans come into the world, and they like to pet very hard and pull tails and all that type of thing. And so Puzzles developed a mechanism of that to where she would just, when they would enter the room, she would run away. And it's taken about 5 years now. The girls are about 5 years old, and Puzzles is finally starting to calm down a little bit, starting to kind of be around, to be okay being around them, because they know they're not necessarily always going to pull her tail or pet her really hard or whatever. But it took some time for us to teach the girls how to be around the cat in a way that was comfortable, that was relaxed, that it didn't put Puzzles on end, freaking out that she was going to get harassed or screamed at or hit or whatever. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of the way our relationship with God can be too. Because it's interesting, Jesus' disciples said to Jesus, and this is both in Matthew's account and Luke's account of the Lord's Prayer, where they said, Lord, teach us to pray like John taught his disciples. Now, again, a lot of times whenever we think, if someone says, well, how am I supposed to pray? Teach me how to pray. Oftentimes we say something like, well, just, talk to God. Prayer's just talking to God. And we act like it's self-evident. But in a lot of ways it's not. And it wasn't even for Jesus, because Jesus said, this then is how you should pray. And he gives the Lord's Prayer as a model for that, of how we learn how to interact with God. That in a lot of ways we had to learn what God was like before we could interact with him. And so we see this at the beginning whenever Jesus says, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, that we see Jesus is giving instruction around what God is like. Because the truth is, until we learn what God is like, we're never going to be able to relax in his presence. And I think that's what God desires for us, is for us to be able to have intimacy with him, to have a genuine, close, meaningful connection. And that's why he presents himself to us as Father, knowing that God wants an intimate relationship with us. Because the thing is, if we don't understand what God is really like, if we don't really understand his character, that affects how we interact with him. In fact, I actually heard someone ask this question once to help you understand how you actually view God. They asked the question, when God thinks of you, not when you think of God, but when God thinks of you, what's the first word that comes to mind? And he made the point that oftentimes, if people were to be honest and answer that question, when they think of what God thinks when he thinks of us, most of the time they would use the word disappointed or maybe angry. That's actually how we view God. We think God is continually disappointed with us. He's continually angry with us because of our failures, because of our brokenness, because of our sin. And whether we realize it or not, that actually shapes how we interact with him. Because the thing is, if I think God is perpetually disappointed in me, perpetually angry with me, I'm never going to be able to relax in his presence. I'm never going to be able to just kind of kick back and just be with God, because that's what God desires, is for us to simply want to be present with him as he is present with us. It's the same thing with our other relationships too. I think about my own wife, that because I have intimacy with my wife, because we have a close relationship, I know her character, I know her heart, I know her mind. And so then when we get to the second part of that prayer where it says, let your kingdom come, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, I know what my wife's desires and wants and needs are because I'm close with her. I know her heart. I know what she desires. I know what, she wants in the world. And so my desire is to see her happiness carried out in the world. And I think it's the same thing, that we often think like we have to stir ourselves up and try really hard and strive and try to want God's kingdom come into the world. But the thing is, when we really understand God as Father, as loving us, as wanting intimacy, we should naturally want that type of kingdom to come in the world through everything that we say and do. If you need a little bit of a shift in your mind about how maybe God thinks of us, consider the words of Jesus in Matthew 11:28. Rather than saying, hey, you need to try harder, you need to do better, instead what Jesus says to us is, he says, come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am humble in heart, and I will give you rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That's what Jesus invites us to, not to have to stand at attention all the time before God, but to be able to rest, to take on Jesus' easy yoke, and know that God has invited us to intimacy with the Father. And see, once we understand God in that way, you better believe I want to see that type of kingdom come into the world. I want to see God's will done on the earth, because I know that his will for me is good and proper and right, and I want to see that come into the world. And so I encourage you today, as you begin to talk about these things and go through the questions, consider the easy yoke, the light burden that Jesus invites us to, especially in how we interact with God in prayer.